evening, everyone. We want to thank you for coming tonight to our Zoom presentation. I want to thank the Friends of the Library for supporting our programs and bringing people like Steve in for your entertainment. Before I start the program, I do want to let you know that I think there should be a survey that pops up after we leave the presentation. Otherwise, I'm going to email everyone a survey, and if you could fill it out, that would be fantastic as we try to find out, what we can do better and, what type of programs that you like. So you could do either one, after the presentation. Also, Steve will be doing his presentation, and we have a Q&A at the bottom. I'd like you to ask your questions down there, and at the end of the program, after when Steve's slide comes up, question and answer, I'll come back on and I'll read those questions to Steve for our presentation. So tonight we're real happy to bring Steve back. Steve is a military historian, and he did a fantastic job. He came and did one on the Battle of the Bulge, which was close to my heart because my dad was in the Battle of the Bulge, and one on D-Day, which was excellent. I didn't know all the information about that. And then he did one on cemeteries overseas, where many of our military people are buried. And so that was really good. But tonight he's going to talk about World War II in the Mediterranean. And again, I hope that you enjoy the presentation, and I'll be back towards the end for the questions. So please put your questions in the bottom of the Q&A, and that's down at the bottom. And I'm going to hand it over to Steve now. Thanks, Steve.
Well, thanks, Maggie, and good evening, everybody. It's great to have you online with us. This is a new experience for many of us, but it's a great way for me to be able to interact with all of you and share some of the information and stories that I have heard over the years. I've been been a military historian for, as it turns out, almost 50 years. And had great opportunities of talking with a lot of veterans, and I'm a little different. I just don't read books, I actually go there. So all the places that I'd be talking about during this program, I've been there more than once. And so just sit back and enjoy the presentation, and at the end, be very happy to address any questions or comments that you may have. So. Well, let me first start about before we actually get into the Mediterranean. The Germans declared war on the United States on December 8th, 1941. And through a lot of talking with our joint allies, we primarily with the influence of Winston Churchill, we determined that Germany, victory against Germany would be the first priority, and then the Pacific would turn our attention to the Pacific. So a mass effort originated in the United States to generate a lot of the materials and supplies and manpower that would be going into this operation. And because the Germans were unsuccessful in invading and knocking England out of the war, England essentially became a floating supply base. That's our bombers, which we carried on an air war against Germany, and the German war machine in Europe originated through bomber bases in England. But there was a project called Operation Bolero, and this was a long-term operation which necessitated the American buildup of troops and equipment in Great Britain. And along with this was the Battle of the Atlantic, where we had all these convoys coming over, and it was the German U-boats that were trying to destroy the transport ships that were coming over. So this was one of the longest battles in World War II. It was actually the Battle of the Atlantic, of which we used destroyers, sonar, different types of weapons and different techniques and strategies in order to defeat the German submarine warfare. A plan was also created, generated. It's called Operation Sledgehammer. And there was actually a plan for a cross-channel attack from Great Britain to France, somewhere in northern France, to invade in 1942. And it was quite a detailed plan, but many felt it was premature. And if you tried, there was a lot of concern that if you try something ahead of time when you weren't 100% ready for it, that you were facing potential of disaster, of defeat. Operation Roundup was a similar plan that was supposed to take place in the spring of 1943. These were detailed plans, but obviously neither of them ever came to fruition. The Churchill influence, he had a lot to project. He had the ear of FDR, and he had a lot of influence in how the Allies would become part of this war against Germany. So he believed that, truthfully so, that the invasion in France in 42 and 43, Sledgehammer, that would be premature, and failure would extend the war by several years. Churchill believed that the Allied effort would be better served by focusing on what he termed the soft underbelly of the Axis, and he's referring to the Mediterranean. And the Germans had so many divisions, but they were fighting on many fronts. They were fighting in Italy. They were fighting, well, not so much in France at this point, but in the Russian front, which absorbed a lot of the German manpower, and in North Africa. So by getting the Germans fighting in different areas, you kind of thin out their presence in any one of the theaters, and you overextend their supply lines. And these are all tactics to kind of soften up the Germans and be able to defeat them piecemeal, one place at a time. And the Mediterranean was the first step. And in November 42, the U.S. forces landed near Casablanca, and also passing through the Straits of Gibraltar between Africa and Spain, and landed in Algeria and Morocco. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the commander of this task force, and this is kind of important. This was the first time he'd ever been in combat. During World War I, Eisenhower had never fought. He never went to France and never fought in World War I. So this was all new to him. It was all stuff that he had studied, but he had never originated any real plans or actually faced combat. So Operation Torch was a three-prong attack into Morocco and Algeria to wage war against the Field Marshal Rommel's Africa Corps. Now, we had our forces in the western part of North Africa, but on the eastern part, coming out of Egypt toward Libya, we had the British 8th Army under Field Marshal Montgomery. And so we had the Germans sandwiched in between there. And we pretty much dominated the air over the Mediterranean, so defeat fell upon the Germans in May of 1943. Where we would strike next was always you got to keep your enemy guessing. And, there was some thought to landing in Sardinia to be able to cross over into Italy. They thought we were going to invade Greece. And the whole thing was just keeping your opponent guessing. I don't know if you ever heard of a book called The Man Who Never Was, and it's an interesting story. They wanted to convince the Germans that we were going to attack in another area and not Sicily. Sicily, in this map here, you can see, is centrally located in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And it's a great springboard for invading the Italian peninsula. You control all the east-west traffic convoy traffic going, through the Mediterranean. It's really a strategic location, and you wanted the enemy to concentrate their forces somewhere else and not in Sicily. So this whole episode, they had someone who died. This is a body. They dressed him in the uniform of a British Marine major, and they created some false documents and maps and other things that were very convincing for an assault in Sardinia. And so they put it in a briefcase and they handcuffed it to the arm of this individual and made it look like a plane crashed and he was a passenger on that plane and he was a casualty. And so they planted this body outside of on the coast of Spain by a submarine. And the Spanish found the body. And of course, the ambassador to Germany relayed the information and the data that was inside the briefcase. And so the Germans ended up buying it hook, line, and sinker. An interesting way to propose something like this. And they really were convinced, and so they readied their forces for an invasion of Sardinia when it never happened. And we did a assault on Sicily instead. This whole operation, it was concocted operation, was called Operation Mincemeat, and it was very, very successful. Well, Sicily was going to be the objective, the next move in the Mediterranean to apply more and more pressure on the Germans and Italians. At this point, they were still in the war too, Italy was. So they wanted to overextend and get the Germans to focus and put more troops in Italy and thin out their presence other places. So Operation Husky took place on July 9th, 1943. Sicily, as you can see in this map here, is triangular shaped. And the prize was up in the upper northeast corner, a place called Messina, the Straits of Messina. It's about 2 miles actually across, going from Messina to the toe of the boot, Italian peninsula. And anyone that was on Sicily, if you got to Messina, you pretty much cut them off. So that was the objective. Now, there was as you may have been, if you read anything about World War II, there was a lot of friction between the American troops, mostly Patton, and the British troops under Montgomery. Patton and Montgomery were always at it. Not enough they're fighting the Germans and Italians, but they're fighting themselves. It's a lot of egos going around there, a lot of testosterone, as I used to say. And so on the southeast section, south of Syracuse, is where the British were going to be landing, near Augusta and Syracuse. And then over further to the west, near Gela and Licata, is where the Americans were going to land. Now, Montgomery envisioned that the American forces would just kind of protect the British left flank as they marched up along the road there toward Catania and toward Messina. So Patton did things a lot differently. He just went diagonally across, captured Palermo, and then came around the north coastline of Sicily, extending from the west to the east. And he ended up getting in Messina before the British did. So, but before all this started, and here you can see that, Comicio, Licata, and Gela, those are all American areas. Licata, the 3rd Infantry Division landed there. Gela was the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. And Comicio was a D-Day objective for the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds. But before all that happened, this is a picture of the invasion of beaches. They were they were perfect. They were flat. You had landing craft that can come up. Out in salt water, you have seasonal, daily tides, which high and low tide. So the LCI, or landing craft infantry, number 220 over there on the left, came ashore, and then at low tide, it's kind of there. Can't do anything. The landing craft were coming in, bringing supplies, ever-present supplies up on the beaches over here. And here I am standing in the exact same location. This is Gela. This is where I'm standing on the beaches where the 1st Infantry Division landed. And behind me down the beach there is an oil refinery. There's no evidence that this was ever an invasion beach. It's just, if you didn't know it, you weren't going to, there was nothing that was going to tell you about it. But all this area here is what it looked like at least 3 years ago. Before the troops landed on the beaches, Husky 1 and Husky 2 were airborne assaults, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, parachuted into the area directly behind the beaches up in the rocky areas. And their job was to prevent the Germans from staging a counterattack. The most vulnerable time in an assault is when they're actually on the beaches before they have a chance to move inland. And you're very susceptible to being driven back into the sea. So to prevent that, this was they used the paratroops for the first time. The whole concept of parachute troops originated actually in 1940. I mean, within a matter of only 3 years, we created the 82nd Airborne was the first airborne division the United States ever had, and it's still in existence at this point. And so the whole concept of this is the largest airborne assault to date was at this time here. And the first night, Husky 1, there were a total of 4 battalions. That's 3 of them from the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment and the 3rd Battalion of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, all from the 82nd Airborne. And there was some support troops as well that jumped in too. The aircraft came in. It was a dog leg affair. They went from Kairouan and Oujda, in Morocco and Tunisia. They went due east, and when they got to Malta, they went north. And that was supposed to take them right over the beaches, their drop zones behind Gela. A lot of things happened, like they got lost. Navigation at night was not a precise operation at the time, and they got lost, and some planes were as much as 25 miles away from their intended drop zones. But they dropped them wherever they were, and that had served an effect as well, that the Germans were overwhelmed, had no idea what the Americans were after or how many there actually were. But they gave good accounting for themselves. And a big surprise was they ran into German armored units. Intelligence had said that there was no German armor on Sicily. And we found out there was a Panzer division, the Hungarian Panzer Division, which had many of the new Tiger tanks. These are very they're heavy tanks with 88 millimeter guns and very thick armor. And the big fight near Biazza Ridge prevented the German spearhead from hitting Gela and driving the 1st Division into the water. The next day, July 10th, 11th, during the night of July 10th, the Husky 2 jumped in. Now, this was very controversial, and it was the largest incident of fratricide in American military history. Previously, before the aircraft came over the coastline, German twin-engine bombers attacked the invasion fleet, and they were driven off. There was very light casualties, but when the American aircraft started coming in the same area, the nervous naval anti-aircraft gunners and those even on who had landed already opened up on the American aircraft, the C-47 unarmored transport aircraft, and they shot down 27 of them. So 27 transports were shot down. The assistant division commander of the 82nd was missing in action, and his plane, they presume, was shot down by the United States Navy. In spite of all this, the American paratroopers landed and were able to hold the area behind the beaches and allow the 3 American divisions to land intact and then be able to push on successfully. Now, the picture on the left is a good friend of mine who he's passed away since then, but Don Rutter was in the headquarters company of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, and he made 3 combat jumps, and Sicily was his first time jumping out of an airplane in combat. And he was real thrilled to be able to go back, and I was very honored to have him on one of my tours, and we took him through the area. And I did a lot of research knowing where he had landed, and tried to get him as close to where he landed and some of the places where he fought. So it was a good friend of mine. The pictures on the right, the one on the bottom was taken in July of 1943, and it's a pillbox complex at Pontedrillo. And the picture directly above it, I found exactly where the photographer was standing and took a picture of that, of the exact same scene. So the Italian pillboxes were round, mostly round, and whereas the Germans later on had more rectangular shaped pillboxes. But these things were made very, very strong, and so here we are 70, 75 years later, and they're still there. They're not going anywhere soon. So Don and myself, we visited one of the only monuments in the area, and this was constructed by some friends of the 82nd Airborne Division at the 50th anniversary, which was 1993. And on it, it lists all those that were killed in action during the invasion of Sicily. Now, going down on the left-hand column, you go all the way down. There's a PFC, Thomas, where is he? Yeah, Thomas D. Adams. Don Rutter landed with Tom Adams, and he was with him when Tom Adams was killed by Italians. So it was pretty emotional for him. The invasion of Sicily lasted until August, probably 1 month, and that's when the Americans took Messina and cut off all the Germans. But the Germans were able to hold the area and get out of there as quickly as possible. And so many of the troops that they hoped to have trapped on and captured on Sicily, they crossed the Straits of Messina and we'd be running into them again during the fighting on the Italian mainland. The actual American or Allied invasion of Italy occurred on September 9th, 1943. Now, south of Naples is the town of Salerno. And in this map, Salerno is on the north end of that bay. And this is it's a perfect area for landings. It's sheltered water, so you don't have a lot of rough waves and everything else. But let me point out some of the vulnerabilities of this plan. Right in the middle, you have the Salento River, which bisects Salerno Bay. To the north of that, is in that line, it says 10th British Corps, and then below that is the 6th U.S. Corps. And so the invasion beaches are two separate invasions. They're not one. So each one is in particularly vulnerable. To the north, you can see how far away the main British landings were. And to the south, you can see where initially the 36th Infantry Division, a National Guard outfit from Texas, where they landed near a place called Paestum. And Paestum, we'll see more about that later. They're really separated. And the whole area is pretty flat until it starts almost where the edge of the map is. It starts to go up and create these very high hills, is what Italy is known for. The commander, 5th Army, who was in overall command of all the forces landing, was Lieutenant General Mark Clark. And I'll talk more about him later, but he's a commander of 5th Army. And it was his intention to make this landing without preliminary naval or aerial bombardment, just kind of in the middle of the night land all these forces. It sounded good, but the Germans knew where we were and everything else, so it just didn't work out very well. And initially, there was a big concern that they'd have to evacuate off the beaches and that the invasion, the actual Allied landings, were doomed to failure. But by September 16th, there were 189,000 Allied troops ashore in the Salerno area, pushing inland. And by the end of the landing operation, the Allies lost killed, wounded, and captured about 12,560, whereas German losses were very minimal, about 3,500. And the Germans, well, they helped to be able to contain the Allied landings. And later on, I'll show you a picture from the German positions looking down on the invasion beaches, and you can see for yourself. The commander, Mark Clark, he ended up being the youngest major general with 2 stars in the United States Army. Later on, he received his 3rd star as lieutenant general. And he was appointed commander of the 5th Army, 5th U.S. Army, on January 5th, 1943. And he was overall command of Allied forces landing at Salerno on September 9th, 1943. And it was very controversial. He did a lot of things that particularly the 36th Division was from Texas, and there's a couple of operations where he ignored intelligence, and there was great loss of life. There have been a lot of casualties, and this whole division was pretty well beat up at this one operation across the river over there, and in the south of Casino and the Volturno River. And what the officers did is they said that after the war, they were going to petition the Congress to have a board of inquiry into his handling or mishandling of his area here in Italy, resulting in massive unnecessary casualties. So it was very controversial. After the war, there was a board of inquiry, but it was deemed that if this would establish a very serious precedent where any general would be reluctant to do certain things because therefore later on he can be uh, anything that he does can be looked back upon as being controversial or not, or whether it was actual negligence or but so anyways, they what they did is they just said that Clark, they pretty much slapped him on the hands, but they found him not guilty, and they wanted to allow American generals to have that latitude to be able to do their work without fear of someone looking over their shoulders and questioning every little thing they do. Way up on the highlands behind Alta Villa is a hill called 424. 424, it's 424 meters above sea level. When you hear about hills that are where it has a number, that's actually the altitude of elevation of that particular hill. This hill here changed hands about 4 times, back and forth. And in the picture on the right, or excuse me, on the left, you have the monuments made out of artillery projectiles or fragments that were found on that hill. And the lower right-hand corner is a view of all the area. Now on the horizon, you can barely see it, but that's the sea over there, the Bay of Salerno. And you can see from these positions, the Germans can see just about everything. So they were able to call in artillery on every little movement that the Allies made and made it very precarious. So it's a very important picture to be able to see, to understand the terrain. And I believe very strongly that in understanding an historical event, the geography plays a big part in it in many cases. And so being able to understand and appreciate the terrain and the topography, also a lot of things become crystal clear later on. Parts of that event are very clear. Well, for some reason I'm going back. There we go. There we go. In the town of Paestum, there are these Greek, yes, I said Greek ruins, and there was an ancient Greek settlement here, and they built these temples. And in the lower right-hand corner is a picture I took when I visited the area. And directly above it is, you can see World War II soldiers marching through the same area. And there were 2 big temples there. This is just one of them. And in one of them, Mark Clark set up his headquarters in the ruins of this Greek temple. And that rose many comments about him thinking so highly of himself that he had his own temple. But these were readily recognizable, and it was easy to see it, and everyone knew where they were. So as far as contact for his headquarters, it had some advantages. But these ruins are still there, and there's museums and tours of these locations. You can see Naples here, and then down to the south, you can see Salerno Bay. And once again, like in all my presentations, I like to incorporate a lot of maps to be able to make things, to connect the dots, as I say. Because it's a peninsula, it's the German defense lends itself to fortified battle lines all the way across the peninsula. Now, as the Allies are moving, in this case, to the northwest, at the top of the map are the British 8th Army, And then on the southern end of it is the American Fifth Army. Right down the middle, the whole terrain is very mountainous, extremely mountainous. And so it pretty much restricts the movements to the extremes, whether you're in the Adriatic Sea for the British or the Tyrrhenian Sea for the Americans, and be able to move further up the peninsula. So these green lines across are different lines that were constructed, fortified lines to prevent the Allies from moving forward and inflicting heavy casualties on them. Of particular interest is this red line. It's called the Gustav line. And in the American sector, you can see the word casino. This is, casino it was a monastery. It was a 10th century monastery there, a Franciscan monastery. And because of the being on a hill, you can see just about anywhere. So it was very a strategic area and was the attention of the Allied drive. There were 3 separate battles for casino, and only one of them incorporated American troops. But you can see also there's a Rome further up the road there, and along the connecting Rome and Casino, you can see where it says Route 6. This is the road. There's very few roads in the area, and those that were around were not exactly the best quality roads. But Route 6 kind of parallels the Leary Valley, the Leary River, and that heads kind of points directly at Rome. So that was the big drive, was to get to capture Casino. And so it became a focus of the Italian campaign in 1943-44. Just south of Casino, heading down, if you follow Route 6 down toward the Volturno, you can come into this one area. Elevation is paramount. If you capture the high ground, you're looking down at your enemy. And this is Mount Simucro, and it's called Hill 1205 because that was how many meters above sea level it was. This was one of the tallest hills in the area. It's the highest elevation, and in the foreground, you see a road coming by. You see those roads in front there? Well, the one that kind of comes up a little and heads over to the right, that is Route 6. That's Highway 6. And so you can't move on Highway 6 with someone looking at you and seeing every little thing you're doing. And they can, you can't maneuver. So you have to take some of the high ground. And at the base of Mount Simucro, you can sort of see it on the right-hand side, almost in the center of the picture, is the village of San Pietro. And it was at the base of Mount Simucro, and there were 2 major battles to try to take San Pietro, and the town was devastated. They just flattened, both sides fired into it, and they flattened it, the village itself. And even to this day, the ruins of San Pietro are still visible. You can drive right through it and actually see what the town looks like, had looked like during World War II, just by walking through the streets. December was not a good, 1943 was not a good time to be in the area. There were 2 separate battles of San Pietro, and they lasted a long time, several days each. And armor, this isn't exactly the best ground for armor, for tanks, but they used them in both times trying to take San Pietro, and it was the Germans used minefields and artillery to neutralize the American armor assaults. This is what Mount Simucro looks like now, up in the upper right, and over on the left side is what it looked like back then. This is almost looking at the same view. And you can see these poor Italian people who are just trying to mind their own business, and scratch out a living for themselves and their families, were just, their world was turned upside down. The whole areas were just flattened and destroyed. And they were forced to shelter in caves in the side of Mount Simucro, and those caves are still visible. You can, I take my people on my tours. We went right through there, and I showed them where the Italians lived, and the Germans would see the civilians there, and they wouldn't bother them, and neither would the Americans. But life was just unbearable. In the lower right-hand corner is a monument dedicated to the 36th Texas Infantry Division, same people that landed in Salerno and got scuffed up there a little bit. These were the same people that ended up fighting in San Pietro, in both battles of San Pietro. And so there's a monument that constructed by the Italians to the 36th Division. After Mount Simucro was pretty much neutralized or in Allied control, they were looking right up at Cassino. And this was the anchor point of the Gustav Line. The Monastery Hill, and this was, once again, you're on the high ground, you can look down on it, and you can see anything and everything that goes through the Liri Valley and up Route 6. And it blocked the Allied advance headed toward Rome. And between January 17th and May 18th, there were 4 major assaults on Monte Cassino there. Eventually, the capture resulted in 55,000 Allied casualties and about 20,000 German casualties. So you see, and so far in Salerno and in Cassino, the Allies are taking more casualties than the Germans. Usually it's the attacking army that bears the greatest loss of life to their own troops. And that's certainly the case here in Italy so far. There's a gentleman who lives in St. Clair Shores, and not too far. He actually lives about 4 miles from where I live right now. I live in Fraser, and he was a German paratrooper, and he fought at Cassino, and I ran into him at a museum, and rather unexpectedly, and we became good friends, and we talked extensively about this. And the controversy comes where the Allies, because the Germans were able to counter any movement by the Allies, that the Allies felt that the Germans had someone inside the monastery, and calling in artillery or being able to report on the movements of Allied troops. The Germans said, nope, we don't have anyone in there. And this veteran I've talked with, Hans Sanger, said, yep, that was right. We were not allowed to go inside that monastery. They had to stay at least 100 meters below the monastery. And he showed me on a map exactly where his machine gun position was, and he was about approximately halfway up the hill. But I was able to, when I visited, I found his position and looked, and you don't have to be on top of that hill to be able to see where the Allies are moving. And in the lower right-hand corner is the view from that machine gun position. I'm halfway up Monastery Hill, and I can see anything that's going on. I'm looking right down at the town of Cassino, and it pans off, and I can see far. I'm looking south, and I can see from that position, I can see Mount Simucro and San Pietro, which was about 15 miles away. But the Allies didn't believe that. They felt they needed to flatten and destroy that monastery. So on Valentine's Day of 1944, a large bomber force, heavy bombers, B-17s, B-24s, as well as medium bombers like B-25 bombers, they dropped all their bomb tonnage on that monastery, destroying it. Fortunately, the German commander, regional commander, who was very religious, he was very concerned that the Allies would destroy this historic treasure. And he helped the monks be able to evacuate all the works of art out of there. Well, most of them anyways. And they moved them for safekeeping further up into Italy. And this is about the third time they rebuilt that monastery. All through history, you know, people destroy it. And the last time it was destroyed by the Allies. And so over on the left, you can see what it looks like today. And yeah, you can appreciate the vantage point it had. This is a photograph of the actual bombardment of the monastery. You can see that pile of clouds up on top of Monastery Hill. And in the background is Mount Simucro, which was higher than Monastery Hill. It became clear that Allied casualties were going to mount. Monte Cassino and the Gustav line were a real tough nut to crack. So they came up with a new strategy. It was an end run by landing troops north and behind German lines. And this was the Battle of Anzio. It lasted from January 22nd to June 5th, 1944. And they landed initially 2 divisions. And there was supposed to be an airborne assault, so elements of the 82nd Airborne who were supposed to jump in there found out they couldn't because all the aircraft, C-47 transport planes, were being rerouted and sent to Great Britain because in preparation for the Normandy landings, which were, of course, as you know, is June 6, 1944. So these paratroopers and Rangers had to land make an amphibious landing. So they landed with the main assault force on January 22nd. All these Allied troops were under the command of Major General John Lucas. And John Lucas, he was former commander of the 3rd Infantry Division, and he was very cautious. You know, sometimes you can be overly cautious, and I think that's what his situation was. Wasn't initially very aggressive. It could have been more aggressive, but the landings went unopposed. There was no preliminary bombardment or anything. They just landed these troops there. German resistance was negligible. There's a few aircraft came over and dropped a few bombs, but for all intent and purposes, the Germans were caught by surprise. And movement off the beaches and movement inland was rather rapid, and he became spooked. He thought that they were marching into a trap. So he stopped them. He stopped the movement, halted the advance, and so they can get more troops ashore. The area from where you land at Anzio going inland was really flat. This was an area that was used to be a swamp. And Benito Mussolini, the Duce for the dictator of fascist dictator of Italy, he, for better or for worse, he started a land reclamation project where they dug these ditches and it drained the water of the swamps into the ocean. And so it created all this flat land that they turned into farmland. And so this was a pet project where he had his people, that loyal subjects, they were given land in this area to grow crops and prosper. So this whole area was was all farmlands, but it was flat as a board. You can see anything and everything that's moving around out there. And this resulted in a lot of a prolonged campaign. It didn't have to be like this, but it drained out, all the way to eventually to June. and extensive casualties. Once again, you had Allied strength when they landed was about 36,000. And then ultimately in the breakout in June, they had gotten upwards of 150,000 troops to break out. Here, you see the Allied casualties were about 43,000. And once again, the German losses were a little bit lower, 40,000. This was a very prolonged campaign. You couldn't move anywhere without the Germans seeing you, and so night raids were very important, and the American paratroopers and rangers were very good at it. But during the Battle of Cisterna, 2 ranger battalions were wiped out, were trapped and wiped out. The 1st Rangers and the 3rd Ranger battalions were wiped out. Now in Anzio, you can see in the picture in the upper right, the topography once again. So Anzio was in Nettuno. Nettuno is a little further south on the coastline over there. You have a little bay there, and Anzio is pretty much of a point. It's because of the currents in the ocean, Tyrrhenian Sea, made this little point over there. And the Allies landed on the northern or the southern end of it, over on the right side of that bay between Anzio and Nettuno. And the whole effort was to drive right in, but because the Germans can see everything you're doing, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see where the American troops began burrowing into caves and underground, so they wouldn't be observed by the Germans. Now that picture up on the left, you can see some of the LCI landing craft infantry that landed, and the Germans came over a few aircraft, dropped a few bombs, and someone got lucky and hit one of the LCIs. And I mean, that's all they had. Matter of fact, it was operational security is a critical element in making an assault. And when the troops were being staged south of Naples for this invasion, something rather odd happened. There was a Italian, the Italian people were doing anything and everything to make some money to be able to feed their families. And one Italian was selling postcards of Anzio to the troops that were staging there to land at Anzio. And that really spooked a lot of people because they felt, do they know we're coming? You know, why would he be doing this? So there was a lot of weird things happen in war, and that was another chapter in the invasion of Anzio. You had the breakout, which was staged, and once again, this is something where, let's see. Yeah, let me go back here a little ways. I just want to show you. Now, this map here is great because you can see up the coast, up in the upper left-hand corner, the town of Anzio on the shoreline. You can see where that is in relation to Rome. But you also had troops in Cassino. So the game plan was to just cut right across Anzio, from Anzio to Route 6. And therefore, you would trap all the Germans that were in the Cassino area and cut them off. And they would be, you could either kill, wound, or capture the whole thousands and thousands of German troops. But that's not what General Mark Clark did. He was concerned about being about fame and his place in the history books. So he wanted to be the first to enter Rome. So instead of cutting across to the upper right hand and cutting off Route 6, he followed Route 7 and went into Rome. This resulted in a lot of German troops retreating from Cassino on Route 6 and bypassing, staying on the outskirts of Rome over on the right-hand side of Rome and escaping. These troops would be fighting them till the end of the war. If that would have shortened up things over here, would have facilitated the collapse of German resistance in Italy, would have done a lot. But Mark Clark wanted to capture Rome. So he did that. So he got, I mean, once again, as I mentioned, he was very controversial, and he marched to his own drummer. And so they went up on Route 7, which went into Rome. The Germans, they left Rome as an open city, meaning they weren't going to put any resistance. They weren't going to fight in the streets or nothing. They didn't want Rome to be destroyed. And Rome was actually the first Axis or enemy capital to be captured. And it was captured on June 4th, 1944. But did anyone see it on the newspapers, on the headlines? Nope. Because 2 days later, you know what happened? The landing in Normandy. So that took all the front headlines, and very few people went and heard about what happened in Rome. So once again, Mark Clark was foiled in his attempt to get famous. So, but not many people heard about what happened in Rome. All attention was driven toward Normandy. Now, a couple of things happen at this point. Fifth Army would later continue fighting north from Rome, heading toward the Po Valley in northern Italy. And as I said, that would drag out to May of 1945. But several divisions were belonging to 6th Corps, part of for 5th Army, were pulled aside, and they would later land on August 25th. They would be landing in the southern part of France, up toward Lyon. You had the 3rd Infantry Division, the 36th Division, those Texans that got scuffed up a little bit, and then you had the 45th Division, as well as paratroopers and Rangers. They landed and opened up a new front and put more direct pressure on the Germans. And they went up the valley and kind of skirted around Switzerland, because Switzerland, as you know, was neutral. And they helped right around the southeastern section of France. They opened up a new front there and put more pressure. So out in France, you had, on the south, you had 7th Army, then you had Patton's 3rd Army, and then American 1st Army, and then the American 9th Army, and then you had the British Army there. So that was from the south to the north, all the way across, facing the Germans, a solid front. And that was all part of Eisenhower's grand strategy and plans. So you had the American Army in Italy breaking up into 2 elements, one making amphibious landing near Marseille, and another one that was fighting its way all the way up the Italian peninsula with the British and Commonwealth forces in that area. At this point, I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. And if you can send your questions to Maggie, she'll read them to me, and I'll do my best to get you an answer. I can't hear you, Maggie. Can you hear me now?
Hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. The first one was from Doug. He wanted to know what the involvement of the Italian army in these campaigns. What was the Italian army doing?
Well, Italy surrendered. to the Allies in September of 1943. And what they did is they pretty much kicked Mussolini out of office. Actually, they arrested him, and they ceased resistance. And that kind of irritated the Germans, as you could understand. And so the Germans pretty much had to take over all the positions held by Italian troops, but the Italians, they ceased all resistance. And so there was a lot of friction between the Germans and the Italians. There's several instances where there were massacres or Italian troops were killed, but for the most part, Italians surrendered, and many of them ended up fighting on the Allied side. There's Laguna, pretty close to where San Pietro is. There's a cemetery there where there's Italian soldiers who fought for the Allies against the Germans are buried over there. So they have their own cemetery. But the Italian army kind of ceased to exist and ceased resistance against the Allies in September of 1943. Good question.
And another question from Mike and Ellen. When did the Italians switch sides?
That was the same time, September 1943. There was an American general from the 82nd, it turned out. His name was Maxwell Taylor. Later on, he'd be commander of the 101st Airborne Division. And he could speak a lot of languages fluently, several of them. So they landed him by submarine to talk with Italians pretty close to Rome. This was a very risky operation. And the Italians, had given overtures of wanting to cease resistance and end the war. They had been fighting for a long time. People were tired of Mussolini and the fascists, and they wanted to end the war. They wanted an honorable way out. So there was conversations with Maxwell Taylor and an aide who came with him, and they were making plans for an airborne assault, parachute assault into an airport in Rome, and later on there'd be follow-up troops that landed on the amphibious landing that would link up with them. And they were trying to get assurances that the Italians could guarantee that the American landings there would be successful, but they didn't come up with any of that warm fuzzies about the Italians. And so actually the signal that to cancel the operation couldn't have come in any closer. The elements of the 82nd Airborne Division were in the planes in Sicily, and the engines were running on the aircraft when the last minute signal came to abort the mission, that it would lead to disaster. And it very well could have. But that's perhaps the most controversial part of the whole thing. I mean, that's part of the World War II history that you don't hear very much about. But the Italians, they installed their king. I'm trying to think of what his name is right now. I'm sorry, I don't know his name. But they got rid of Mussolini and restored their the Italian king in his place. Good question. Also, very good questions. Yes. Next one, please.
All right. While we're waiting for any other questions, I did have a question.
Yeah.
So, was the reason why Rome didn't get bombed because of the history and the art? What was the reasoning that they didn't do that, which was good that they didn't do that, but was there anything to that with the art and Hitler?
Well, Hitler had nothing to do with it. Matter of fact, Hitler would have destroyed everything, because you remember there was a very similar set of situations when Paris was captured. Hitler had directed that Paris was to be destroyed and leveled, and the German commander refused to follow Hitler's directive, and he ended up surrendering to the Allies anyway. So intentionally, so that he would, he knew that if Hitler found out about that he would be probably put up in front of a firing squad. Well, the Germans too. There was nothing to be gained by destroying Rome. Just instead of being malicious. So there's no good ground around there anyway. So the Germans fell back just north of Rome and established a new defensive line over there. But once again, these Germans, they understood that they appreciated the history and the art and everything of that made Rome what it is, and they refused to destroy all that for nothing. So. But that's also a very good question, because throughout World War II, a couple of cities are saved from massive destruction, total destruction, just because specific commanders, they appreciate the art, the beauty, the history of these towns, and don't want to have any part of the destruction. Just like what happened at Monte Cassino. That's the complete opposite. That was the Allies over there that flattened this 10th century Benedictine monastery because they thought the Germans were in there. And even after World War II, the Germans said we were not in there. So you pretty much destroyed this for nothing. So, which was very sad, but they built something very, very beautiful there in its place. Okay.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Steve? Okay, I've got one from Mike and Ellen. Was the toe of the boot heavily fortified, which is why they went to Salerno?
A good question. Actually, no. The toe of the boot in Cambria, the Germans, they continued up the peninsula near Foggia on the opposite side where the heel of the boot is. That's the Germans were there, and that's where the British landed, and they landed before the Americans, and the Germans offered them resistance over there, but the Germans fell back to a line just south of Naples, Foggia area, right in through there. And they were in the high grounds right overlooking Salerno. And before the Allied landings early in the war, Salerno area was used as a German artillery range. So the Germans knew all the ranges and where their artillery, how to use their artillery in that area. And there was no good ground in Cambria for the Germans to hold. So they moved further back up the boot. So, yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions for Steve tonight? Okay, Steve will be coming back in November. I think it's November 17th on a Zoom and talking about the Edmund Fitzgerald. And so that is on a calendar. And if you're interested in that, please feel free to sign up for it. I find that very interesting, the Edmund Fitzgerald. And Steve, you can tell a little bit about where you work over there at the museum.
Yeah, I work, I'm the manager of the Dawson Great Lakes Museum on Belle Isle. And this year is a very significant anniversary of the loss of the Fitzgerald. November 10th will be the 45th anniversary of the sinking of the ship. There's been over 6,000 ships sunk in the Great Lakes, and they estimate over 30,000 crew members have lost their lives sailing the Great Lakes And we're entering right now a very volatile time, unstable time in as far as the weather's concerned on the lakes. And pretty much most of the major shipwrecks, at least in recent memory, all happened in November, where you have the cold air masses coming from the south, from the north rather, and warm air from the south, and it creates very unstable atmospheric conditions over the Great Lakes, over all this water. And I'm happy to say that we haven't lost a ship. No ships have been sunk since the Fitzgerald. So we're looking at 45 years of a lot of difficult sailing, but we haven't lost a ship since then. So there's a lot of things that I could tell you about the Fitzgerald. It's a Gordon Lightfoot song has done a lot to stimulate interest in the wreck of the ship, and the fact that I don't want to give the whole story away. I want you to come back and listen on the 17th, but there's quite a bit to hear about it, and some of the facts over the years have kind of come to the surface, so to speak, and makes it that much more interesting. So I promise this will be one that you'll enjoy hearing about. Yeah.
So that again is on November 17th. And then we hope we'll bring Steve back in the winter. He has some ideas for maybe tell us a couple ideas, and then people can put that in the survey, what they're interested in. Steve, you were talking about, was it the Pacific?
Yeah, there's some battles about the Pacific, and we were talking about the end of the war, victory in Europe, and the later stages of 1945. Some really amazing things happened there. Some fascinating stuff, and as you know, I've been taking people on tours of battlefields in Europe since 2001. And I have a program about remembering and experiencing visiting the World War II battlefields in Europe. That was another that was you found interesting, and also the one about the military medals in recognition of valor and service. That's another one too. So there's a number of things we can talk about here. So.
Okay, all right, and well, we want to thank Steve and everyone for coming tonight. There will be a survey, I think, will come up after we exit the presentation, and I'm also going to send one in the email. So please, put your ideas in there. And again, thanks a lot for coming. And again, we want to thank the Friends of the Library for supporting our program tonight. So have a great night, be safe, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Good night.